All right, welcome out. We're doing media bias, political propaganda. This is a really long chapter. There's a ton of stuff here. So probably need at least three, maybe four videos. I wanted to jump in here. I skipped a couple pages, I think, since last time, but this is a good look at the specific. Let me put this down there. Okay, there we go. Reason through news articles, and how do you what's the logical step by step, right? And it's always good to have a checklist. There's a book called The Checklist Manifesto. Excuse me. And it's written by a well-known surgeon, Atul Gawande, and it shows how the number of deaths and the number of errors or issues due to doctor's errors, really dissipated once a checklist was used. So why are checklists important? Because there's usually a lot of stuff to check off, to check through, right? And we are forgetful people. I don't care who you are, how smart you are, right? So there's 8 things to check here. That's a good number of things to forget, right? Number 1, all news articles have a purpose. Is the purpose of the news article clear? Is it muddled, vague, or otherwise obscure? Why? Is the purpose justified or fair in context? Does the reasoning stay focused on its goal throughout the article? Is the purpose realistic? Number 2, all news articles focus on a question or questions that arise from issues or problems considered important. What questions are being addressed in the article? Are there other ways to think about each question being addressed? Can you divide the primary question into sub-questions? And the thing is, you might not do all of this all the time, but maybe, for the first handful of articles, or, I don't know if they have, I guess they still have articles online. You could do this with articles. But you can also think about these questions in terms of videos. And videos are usually not as well laid out, not as logical, not as thorough. They're a little more cursory. But anyways, just to get the questioning down, the flow of ideas, the questions and flow of ideas as you're working through the questions. Can you divide the primary question into sub-questions? Is this a question that has one right answer, or can there be more than one reasonable answer? Does this question require judgment on the part of the reader, or do the facts alone settle the question? Assumptions. There's always assumptions. What assumptions is the reporter making? If the reporter were to begin with a different set of assumptions, how might the article be approached differently? How do your assumptions shape your reading? Which of your assumptions might reasonably be questioned, right? Point of view. So a lot of these are critical thinking elements or terms that are mentioned. If you go back to the second or third chapter, I forget which, but those 3 lists of critical thinking elements that you have to work through in order to be a good, thorough critical thinker. Many of these are in that list, right? So these are not atypical, but they're typical questions that you would ask as a critical thinker, or elements, points that you would cover as a critical thinker. Purpose, focus on a question, assumptions, point of view. What is the point of view from which the reporter is viewing the issue of the article? What other points of view should be considered, right? All news reporting is based on data, information, and evidence. I hope so. To what extent is the reporter's reasoning supported by relevant and significant data? Do the data suggest explanations that differ from those given by the reporter? How clear, accurate, and relevant are the data to the questions at issue? Has the reporter included data sufficient for you to reach valid conclusions? All news reporting is expressed through and shaped by concepts and theories. What key concepts and theories are guiding and the reasoning in the article, what alternative explanations might be possible. Is the reporter clear as to the key concept? Does the reporter distort ideas, right? So these are all kind of typical clarifying, critical thinking clarifying questions, right? Then there's inferences, interpretations that they draw conclusions from. To what extent do the data support the conclusions being advanced by the reporter? Are the inferences in the article consistent with each other? Are there reasonable inferences? All news reporting leads somewhere, that is, has implications, consequences. What implications and consequences follow from the reasoning embedded in an article? If we accept the line of reasoning being presented, what implications or consequences are there? And so forth, right? So, kind of a lengthy, involved list, but good questions to just kind of go over. I don't even know if you want to go into each one of these and ask the questions and write down responses, unless you're doing it for doing the exercise for a class. I don't. I can kind of generally, without even going into all of these areas covered in the 8 questions here, the 8 points here. But and after a while, you pick up experience, as I was going to say. I don't even go into all these questions. You can kind of through experience generally see the and understand, through experience you also understand news sources, the news sources you're looking at. Are you looking at mainstream media, legacy media, your ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News? Are you looking at news stories or articles through those sources? Are you looking at news articles through podcasters, conservative podcasters, leftist, liberal podcasters, centrists, right? And after a while, you can kind of pick up on, you don't have to go through all that detailed questioning to really see what's going on. So it is, but maybe at the beginning, it's good to just, you know, go through these questions one by one and kind of get a feel for where you're heading, right? A lay of the ground, a lay of the land, right? Um, Intellectual standards for assessing news articles, editorials, and stories. Remember that reasonable people judge reasoning according to intellectual standards, as we learned from chapter 5. When you internalize these standards and explicitly use them in your thinking becomes more clear, accurate, precise, relevant. It becomes deeper, broader, and fairer. So these are important points, right? You want your thinking clear. It's difficult, as I've said numerous times. It's difficult to kind of rise above who you are, right? You're brought up, you're getting into critical thinking now. You're maybe, you know, 20 years or so into your life. So that's a lot of conditioning, right? Through school, where you're being schooled, how you're being schooled. Is it a private school? Is it a public school? Who are the teachers? What's the curriculum? What's the perspective? What's the political leanings? What's the social leanings? How does your family view things? Your family has a lot of opinions on things, so that gets ingrained in your point of view, right? And then there's, things that you view online, things that you view on television. There's the time that you're living, the geographic location has influence on how you're thinking, economic, socioeconomic, political, geographic, uh, cultural, religious, political, all those things. So you've got a ton of influence to kind of rise above temporarily, at least. Try to forget it. Good luck, but try to put it aside. Put it all aside and try to see is when I say rise above, I'm not saying in a superior sense, but an actual physical sense where you're going to leave it behind and you're going to rise up to here. and try to think as like a newborn baby, right? Just purge all that stuff. Again, difficult to do, if not impossible, but try to get rid of all those influences and just try to see things as purely as possible, I guess you could say. Anyway, so you want to think clearly, and if you do so well, you think clearly, accurately, precise, relevant, becomes deeper, broader, and more fair. I was listening to some podcaster this morning, and they were talking about Trump and the Republicans non what was it uh, non-college, I think it was college and non-college, but they were focusing on non-college supporters of Trump and how before he was up in the polls, but now he's down. Probably a lot of that has to do with the war in Iran and also the economy. Um, Difficult after COVID to get prices down as much as everybody wants. It's not going to go back to how it was. So maybe some people are being unrealistic in their desires for what they want economically and politically, nationally, internationally. Also, dealing with countries is difficult. You may want the leaders of that country to do something, but they're going to oftentimes fight you tooth and nail, and won't give in and keep pushing things back, or dragging you along. Yeah, that's good. It's been great talking to you, and we'll take that into consideration, and we'll do something for sure. Yeah, and then weeks and months pass, and they've done nothing. So they're leading you along, right? So, anyways, Trump not doing as well as he was supposed to, or as anticipated, or as well as he predicted or suggested he would do, and so forth, right? So, but anyways, the reason I brought this up, kind of a long-winded statement there. The reason I brought this up is because the reporter, I forget where, I think it was a CNN reporter. The reporter is a Democrat, but the person who was reporting on this reporter, coming up with these poll numbers, is a conservative. But he said that he liked this guy because he's pretty honest. If the numbers are in favor of the Republicans, he would mention it. If the numbers were not in favor of the Republicans, he would definitely mention that, right? But he was pretty, straight shooter, right? So that's what you want. That's all you can ask for, right? Just be honest. Don't try to spin things in your favor or the favor of your favorite politician or party, right? So that's what you want. That's how you go. So powerful questions you can ask when you employ your intellectual standards. Characteristics of the disciplined mind that help us detect bias. Critical consumers of the news cultivate intellectual abilities as well as intellectual virtues or character traits. And we've talked about that before, right? Intellectual abilities. So I want to go over here to intellectual virtues, right? And by being virtuous, that's what you're doing. You're trying to pull out or rise above physically, right? To rise above your influences and trying to be as honest and sincere and as virtuous, I guess, another synonym, another word for those words I just mentioned, right? Uh, Try to be as honest as possible, virtuous. You read about these in chapter 1. These virtues are essential to seeing through propaganda. So it's chapter 1. Chapter 1, they begin talking about the elements of critical thinking. And then in chapter 2 or 3, I think it's chapter 3, there's those 3 lists, right? And the third list is characteristics. The first list is, how are you going to think about this critical thinking stuff? What are the terms, being fair-minded, being honest, being thorough, and so forth, right? But the third group is kind of the character. You have to develop a certain character, or I don't know, persona, but personality. You have to develop these certain character traits, to being honest is a very important element or aspect of those character traits, or one of those character traits that's very important. These virtues are essential to seeing through propaganda. Remember, they determine with what insight and integrity you generally think. Here we briefly summarize the primary intellectual, oops, I gotta skip over that, intellectual virtues we explore earlier and suggest questions that foster their development. Only to the extent that you routinely ask questions of yourself will you develop these virtues. So that's the questioning, right? That the text is spoken of, and that I've spoken of many times before. So as a critical thinker, you have to ask yourself questions. Like for instance, in dealing with climate change or education, and I've dealt with both in quite some detail. Education, obviously, much more detail since I'm an educator. But what climate change, what does that mean? And if you go back and study it, you'll find that back in the 70s, one of the first things that was brought to the public's attention was coming ice age, right? And 50 some odd years later, it still hasn't happened, right? Then the next big thing was global warming, and then it went to climate change. So why are these terms changing, right? And then what does that really mean? Let's get into the details, right? It means that because fossil fuels basically are being burned, or CO2 is being put into the environment, more CO2 than the environment can handle, right? And if you put too much CO2 into the environment, allegedly, it causes the what's the word I'm looking for? I had trouble with this before. It causes um, like it basically ends up trapping warm air, right, in our atmosphere, right? Greenhouse effect. There we go. I knew it eventually would come. The greenhouse effect. It ends up, too much CO2 ends up trapping hot air in our environment, in most of the environment. But at the poles, it's releasing cool air, oddly enough, right? But what does that really mean? Isn't CO2 good? We release CO2, animals release CO2. There's a lot of situations where CO2 is being created. Then come to find out it's not so much CO2, but CO2 that is out of the current cycle. CO2 that existed at one time, but is now being brought back into existence, like fossil fuels. My brain's not working well today. Fossil fuels, right? When you burn fossil fuels, what it's doing is releasing old CO2, carbon dioxide, that used to be in the environment and then was trapped and sealed in the ground, right? Through animals dying and vegetation dying and rotting. And now it's being released again. So it's that additional CO2 outside of the current cycle of CO2 that is causing the problem. And then it goes on and on. Then I'm asking questions about cost. Do we know how much it's going to cost and where that money is going to be applied? And have the individuals who are going to do all this cost estimating and applying of techniques to limit the CO2 to our environment, to our world. Do they have experience in doing that before? Do they have a track record, a success, failure track record? So how do we know that they're right about the amount of money that needs to be spent how the money needs to be spent, where it needs to be spent, right? And then, is it just the United States that is going to need to spend money? No. Other major polluters or contributors are China and India, right? Because there's over 1 billion people that live in each one of those countries. Uh, Quite a few more than the 330 million that live in the United States, right? Um, so, are they really participating, doing their part? Because if just the United States does their part, then that's a small percentage of the total environment. So even if we do a great job, it's not going to fix it unless the other countries, especially as those with the greatest populations or area mass, contribute, right? And on it goes. So you see how complicated it gets, right? So I've used critical thinking to really dig down and find out what's going on, right? And then, are there alternative sources of energy that we can use? Well, they've looked into solar, wind, electric, but those are not very dependable, or there's not enough of those energy sources made to really help us to just convert fully to one or all three away from fossil fuels. Just think, I mean, fossil fuels, I mean, with gasoline, I need more gas. You go to the gas station, 5, 10 minutes, your car is ready to go again, right? With electric cars, first of all, you got to find charging stations, or if you say you've got one at home, but you're away from home, you're out traveling, right? You have to find charging stations. And then how long does it take to charge? Hour, 2 hours, 8 hours? I don't know. I guess those vary. Do you have the time? Do you have the extra, uh, if you're on a 2 week vacation, do you have the extra day or two or three to charge your car? Do you want to wait all that additional time to charge your car? And is that charging dependable? Electric cars also have issues in bad climates and really cold climates and so forth, right? So it gets it's much more complicated than just saying, oh, climate change, global warming, let's just fix it, right? Anyways, I think I hurt myself with all that thinking right there. Anyways, I just want to go back and briefly look at the charts they had here. Let's go back here. Here's your critical thinking standards that were spoken to. Did they mention the chapter? Yeah, chapter 1. But and I think I go there. Let's see. I think I have I probably shouldn't be doing this. Oh, there it is. There it is. How about that? Right. This is the list. Make sure I'm sure. So this is the list I was talking about, right? You've got the standards, and I don't have the chapter number there. But anyway, this is the three lists. I think this is from chapter 3, right? They go over the standards and then the elements and then the traits. So you have to have some standards that you live by, right? And some of these you'll probably recognize, right? That we're talking about. They were talking about in that section we were going over: clarity, accuracy, relevance, logicalness. So what are the standards for looking at the issue at hand, right? Our inquiry into climate change, our inquiry into education, are we getting clear, accurate, relevant, logical information of great depth and breadth, information that has been come to on in a fair way, is a complete, comprehensive, significant, precise, all the good stuff, right? Right. And then you have the purposes, the elements, uh, the purposes, I'll be right. The elements, they must be applied to what? The standards must be applied to the elements. Then you're looking at the purpose. What is the purpose of the, and we were looking at purpose in regards to news articles, right? What is the purpose or purposes? Questions, point of view. Remember that one? Information, inferences, concepts, implications, assumptions, right? And then the intellectual traits. This is the individual, this is the vehicle itself, the human, who has to be humble, autonomous. That's a better word, actually. When you're autonomous, you're independent, right? You're away from the influences of others and your own influences, and you're rising above, putting yourself up here almost like a newborn babe. Just empty yourself of all possible influences or assumptions or whatever else is in there that is your point of view that is causing you to see things from a particular point of view, not like a clean slate. So you're trying to be as autonomous or as clean slated as possible, right? When looking at issues, so you can look at them clearly, right? Clearly, accurately, logically, right? Integrity, courage, fair-mindedness, empathy, reason, all that good stuff. So that's, I should keep that available handy whenever I'm doing any of these chapters. All right, intellectual virtues. So let's go back to where we were. Intellectual virtues is a fair-minded critical thinker. And here it is laid out in another form. Intellectual courage. To what extent have I analyzed my beliefs about the issues? To what extent have I questioned the beliefs that guided my judgments? To what extent have I? So you really have to look at yourself honestly, right? That's difficult to do. A lot of people don't do it. They don't want to do it. I don't care. I just know I've always felt this way. This is the way I was brought up. My friends all think like this. My group thinks like this. That's kind of group think, you know. And I'm sticking. That's what I'm sticking with. You know, that's my story. I'm going to stick with it, right? But people do change their opinions after a time because they find out that the way they grew up or the thinking or maybe the propaganda that they were getting from certain sources was really twisting them in the wrong direction, away from the truth. You know, so you have to figure out for yourself. To what extent am I willing to stand up against the majority? Oh, that's a big one. Do I have the courage? So the courage one is hard. That is hard. I can tell you from personal experience. But I don't put myself in a situation, as a critical thinker, you shouldn't have, um, favorite parties or politicians or whatever, because you're trying to be as independent as possible in your thinking, right? There have been certain Democratic presidents I like, certain Republican presidents I like, or one time there was a couple of independent, uh, independent candidates running. So, what do they really stand for? And most people, I'll tell you, to be honest, don't know enough about the issues. They don't know enough about the qualifications of the job. What are the qualifications? Ask yourself that sometime if you're going to vote for president or senator or state representative. What are the qualifications of a president? I don't know. Give me three, right? I bet most people couldn't even do that, right? Like, look up job definition or job qualifications of President of the United States. Empathy. So that's kind of really trying to think about things from the point of view of others, right? What extent do I accurately represent viewpoints I disagree with? Oh, good point. Could I accurately summarize the views of reputable news sources that I tend to ignore? right? And many don't. They just go, oh, those people are evil, and don't look into, or that person's evil, right? That politician's evil. And they don't even look into anything whatsoever about that person or they don't listen to anything they've said. They don't know they know very little about what that person does or stands for, or actually what that politician has done, you know, anything great, anything evil, honestly, or are you just lumping him or her into um, the opposition group think, you're just throwing them into that bucket. And anybody who goes in that bucket, I don't like for the following reasons. Even though it's an individual, I'm just going to apply all these reasons that I don't like people who go into that bucket and apply these reasons to each individual I put in there. Right. Which is wrong if you're a critical thinker, and you understand the complexity of people. That's going to be wrong. Right. If you're looking at a group of a million or millions of people, politically, um, culturally, religiously, and so forth, right? And you just have a generic opinion of those people of a particular political, social, economic, religious group or strata or category are fill in the blank, right? You're going to be wrong. Because people are individuals, right? It's not just uh, you know, a million people, 2 million people, all exactly the same, thinking the same, acting the same influences, same. They're not automatons. They're not robots, right? Not like the Borg. I don't know if you ever saw that from not, is this not Star Trek? The Star Trek. Yeah, it is Star Trek. That's right. Star Trek. The television show, Star Trek. I think that was the next generation, the Borg. Integrity. You can look through these questions. I'm not gonna. We've kind of already gone over these, right? In the first chapter. Reason, confidence and reason. That's not one we really have looked at too much, right? Am I willing to change my position when the evidence in news stories leads to a more reasonable one? Do I adhere to principles of sound reasoning? Sometimes I believed certain things about like Abraham Lincoln. I always thought, he did a pretty good job. He was alive at a very tough time. He kept the country together. He didn't really end slavery, but he saw the institution as, after a while, as being abhorrent. And Emancipation Proclamation, he freed the slaves. Some say it's political, but regardless, he freed the slaves, at least physically. They didn't obtain their rights, political rights, until 100 years later with the Civil Rights Act and the Voters' Rights Act, right? Um, but then I heard, oh, I hate Lincoln. And sometimes people are just contrarians. Everybody loves Lincoln or Washington. Nothing but good stuff about them are said in school, and your books are full of, and they've got statues of both of them in Washington looking like gods, so they could do no wrong. They're not human, they're gods, demigods, semi-gods. And then I saw something. Lincoln is a terrible person. I hate Lincoln. And I was like, that's kind of weird. Or another one was Mother Teresa. You know, you always heard just great things about her. Oh no, she was evil. And I'm like, eh? So I don't say, no, that can't be true. I just pause. I go, really? And I look into it. I'm really curious. And again, I'm not a fan of Abraham Lincoln or Washington or Mother Jones or Sojourner Truth or anybody out there. I I don't have skin in the game, right? So I'm first and foremost interested in just getting the truth. What's the truth? What are the facts? That type of stuff. Or then I heard about Columbus. It's Columbus, nothing but good news about him in school, and then there were some bad things coming out. And then I did some research on that. Question, what's going on? And sometimes these opposing point of views about certain individuals come up because, say, for instance, a particular group, Democrats like those individuals, so therefore Republicans attack them. You know, Obama and Michelle, great people. Then the Republicans go, no, evil, venomous individuals. Or, the Democrats attack certain Republican leaders. And the Republicans are like, oh, yes, so and such and such. Oh, great people, great leaders, uh, gods and goddesses among humans. And then the Democrats go, no, they're evil in every way possible. Right. So then I'm usually the truth lies somewhere in between, right? Here's your autonomy. We talked about that. Objectivity, biases, underlying agendas. So this is the stuff of truths, right? James Madison. Do you know who he is? I think he was a former president. Check him out. Maybe he wrote the Constitution. I don't know. Check him out. Nothing could be more irrational than give people power and to withhold from them information, without which power is abused. A people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. A popular government without popular information and the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both, right? Popular information, right? So the free press, the press is supposed to be, giving us that information, not withholding it, not spinning it, not just, you know, giving forth information that makes your or their party or candidate look good, right? And that's done all the time. So you gotta be careful of that, right? Democracy in the news media. Democracy can be an effective form of government only to the extent that the public that rules the government in theory is well informed about national and international events and can think independently. There you go. Independent. That's what I was talking about. Let's do that. That's there you go. Right? Two keywords, independently, critically. If the vast majority of citizens do not recognize bias in their nation's news, if they cannot detect ideology, slant, and spin, there it is, spin. If they cannot recognize propaganda when exposed to it, they cannot reasonably determine what media messages have to be supplemented, counterbalanced, and thrown out entirely. So true. Right. But there's a lot of that going on, and people just feed into it, and you hear all the time. Oh, if you're on the left, you go, oh, that Fox News, FAUX, right? I think that's I didn't really look that up. I think it's French. Here I am going off script again. I do this in my classes, so don't worry about it. FAUX. Yeah, Fox. FAUX. I don't know how you pronounce that. Yeah, it's French word for false or fake. So Democrats are very well known for using that term. Just like conservatives will say, it's not CNN, it's the Commie News Network or MSLSD, it's Microsoft, is that Microsoft? MS, no, I can't remember. MSNBC? Let me see. There it is.
We are looking at how to pronounce this word of French origin, but that is commonly used in English. In French, this word simply means false, but in English, it designates something made in imitation, artificial, or not genuine, fake, or false. How do you go about pronouncing it? In French, it is pronounced faux. The X is silent, yes, because it is a French word originally. In English, this is usually pronounced faux, faux, as in faux pas. Here are videos on how to pronounce many words in English.
So it's not. Yeah, I guess if you pronounce it phonetically the way it's spelled, F-A-U-X, you would say fox. I think that's what they're doing, but it's pronounced faux, which isn't even anything close to fox, right? But because it's F-A-U-X, they just bastardize it or Americanize it and pronounce it fox. Right? There you go. So some information there for you might be useless, but anyways, there it is. On the other hand, worldwide news sources are increasingly sophisticated in the media logic. This enables news outlets to create an aura of objectivity and truthfulness. On the other hand, only a small minority of people are skilled in recognizing bias and propaganda and the news disseminated in their country. There you go. So it's not just me, right? Right? So a small minority. So how many people who are actually members of one party or another who are just being totally duped? You know, they're not skilled enough in recognizing bias or propaganda, right? So are there people on the right who are looking at certain sources like Fox News and just being brainwashed? Are people on the left watching CNN, MSNBC, and being brainwashed? You know, that's the question. That's the questions you have to ask. Only a few are able to detect one-sided portrayals of events. Only a few, right? Or seek alternative sources of information and the opinion to compare those to the mainstream news media, right? So that's the key point. Small minority, right? Only a few, right? Good to know. So it wasn't just me. It wasn't just my perception. At present, the overwhelming majority of people in the world untrained in critical thinking, there you go, are at the mercy of the news media in their own country. Their view of the world, including which countries and groups they identify as friends and which as enemies. Yeah, so there's certain propaganda that's going on. That's like the current guy in office, right? Um, there's certain propaganda that is coming out that is just totally biased and slanted, right? Um, in a really bad way. So you got to be careful. Not to say any candidate or president is perfect or doesn't have his or her flaws, right? This slanted information is not a plot or conspiracy. It is simply a matter of educational background and economic reality. There you go. That's huge. Journalists and news editors are themselves members of I thought I was going to say cult, members of a culture, right? They share a view of the world with their targeted audience. They share a national sense of history, right? So that's it. There's view of the world, right? Uh, a nationalized sense of history and allegiance, religion. Remember, these are the influences I was talking about before. General belief systems, right? So those are the things you have to like pull yourself out of, pull yourself away from, right? An Arab editor sees the world through different lenses than does an Israeli editor, Pakistani from China, Indian, Chinese from American, right? What is more, news people work under severe time restrictions and limitation of space. It is hardly surprising that profound differences are reflected in news coverage from nation to nation. Plus, you know, especially on legacy media, Legacy media, these are very large corporations, ABC, CBS News, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox. They're very, very large corporations. And money is coming from somewhere. And that money usually is coming from one party or the other. You know, that's something to keep in mind. Um, in any case, only those who understand the conditions in which world media operate have a chance of controlling the influence of the news media upon them. It is in all of our interest to critically assess rather than mindlessly accept. There you go. News, media, pronouncements. Our hope is that we can aid you in becoming more independent. That's huge. That's it right there, right? That's my job. That's what I'm doing, right? And I'm going to be teaching this class again in the fall, right? I've taught critical thinking maybe a dozen, 15 times, 20 times. I don't know. I've lost track. But each time I teach it, I feel the weight of the importance of critical thinking, coming down upon my shoulders and upon the shoulders of others. So I think that's about it. 30, 40, 50. Yeah, we got like 20 pages left. So yeah, this is going to be definitely going to be a grind. All right. So that's it for now. Take care. Be good.